Let's start with the mildly disturbing and slowly work our way towards the most nightmare fuel ones on the list. Number 10. King Fulk III of Anjou. You've probably never heard of this guy, and honestly, that's a crime because his story checks every box for medieval horror. Before we get there though, here's what's coming. You're going to meet a king who roasted his own chef alive over a bad meal, another who genuinely believed he was made of glass and would shatter if anyone touched him, and one who literally cursed his entire kingdom on his deathbed, and the curse actually worked. Plus, I'm throwing in some execution methods these guys invented that'll make you grateful you live in the age of HR departments. Now, Fulk III, 11th century France. This man went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem 4 separate times, which sounds nice until you realize he was basically trying to wipe his cosmic scorecard clean because of what he did to his wife. Fulk suspected his wife of cheating. No trial, no investigation, just vibes and paranoia. So he had her stripped, tied to a stake, and burned alive while wearing her wedding dress. Then he went to Jerusalem to say sorry to God, came back, ruled for a bit, felt guilty again, went back to Jerusalem. Did this 4 times. The man turned atonement into a frequent flyer program. And here's the kicker. Between pilgrimages, he'd just go right back to being a ruthless warlord, conquering territory and crushing rebellions. It was like he discovered the medieval version of a reset button, hands down one of the most transactional relationships with religion ever recorded. Number 9. King Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia. Not the Christmas Carol guy, different Wenceslaus, way worse Wenceslaus. This king in the late 1300s loved his dogs more than his subjects. We're talking obsessive dog person to a degree that would get you banned from every park in town. His hunting dogs ate better than most of his nobles. One day his cook apparently overcooked a roast or undercooked it, sources disagree. But either way, Wenceslaus had the man tied to a spit and slow roasted alive in his own kitchen, made the other kitchen staff watch. The message was clear, seasonings matter, but the dog thing gets weirder. When some monks complained about his policies, he had them thrown into a river with his hunting hounds released to swim after them, just to see what would happen. Spoiler, the dogs won. This man turned every problem into a twisted science experiment, and his lab equipment was either fire or dogs. Number 8. Charles II of Navarre, literally nicknamed Charles the Bad. When your official historical nickname is the Bad, you know you earned it. Mid-1300s, this guy was such a prolific poisoner that nobles started employing food tasters just because he might be at dinner. He tried to poison the French king at least twice. Failed both times, but kept trying like it was a hobby. He'd switch sides in wars based purely on who gave him more land, betray allies mid-battle, and once had his own constable murdered during peace negotiations. Just straight up killed his own employee at a diplomatic function. His death, though? Poetic. Charles got sick in his old age, and his doctor prescribed this medieval treatment where they wrapped him head to toe in linen soaked in brandy to preserve his warmth. A servant came in with a candle, got too close, and Charles went up like a Roman candle. Burned alive, wrapped in alcohol-soaked bandages. The universe has a sense of irony. Number 7. King Robert III of Scotland. This one's different. Not evil, just tragically, cosmically cursed in a way that's almost more disturbing than the intentionally cruel ones. Early 1400s Scotland. Robert was born John, became king, changed his name because he thought John was unlucky for Scottish kings. Didn't help. His older brother kicked him by a horse as a kid, left him partially disabled his whole life. His other brother basically stole half his power and ran Scotland while Robert just watched. His first son died in mysterious circumstances, probably murdered by that same brother. His second son, James, Robert tried to send to safety in France. Pirates captured the ship. James spent 18 years in an English prison. When Robert heard the news, he stopped eating and died of grief within weeks. His requested epitaph was, "Here lies the worst of kings and the most miserable of men." He literally asked to be remembered as garbage. They didn't even put up his tombstone for years because it was too depressing. Sometimes the most disturbing thing isn't cruelty, but just watching a man get destroyed by fate over and over until he gives up. Number 6. King Erik XIII of Sweden. Mid-1500s, this is where we transition from bad decisions to genuine madness. Erik was brilliant early on, spoke multiple languages, reformed the government, seemed destined for greatness. Then paranoid schizophrenia kicked in hard. He started seeing conspiracies everywhere. Believed his nobles were plotting to poison him, replace him, kill him in his sleep. Some of them probably were, that's medieval politics, but Erik took it to another level. In 1567, he had a complete psychotic break during a meeting with imprisoned nobles. Just snapped, grabbed a sword and personally stabbed one of them to death, then ordered his guards to execute several others on the spot. No trial, just murdered a chunk of Sweden's aristocracy in a basement because the voices in his head said they were traitors. After that, he'd have episodes where he'd run through the palace screaming, or he'd vanish into the countryside for days dressed as a peasant, or he'd sit in the throne room talking to people who weren't there. His own brother eventually deposed him, and Eric died in prison, likely poisoned. In his soup, the paranoia was justified after all. Number 5. Peter Verwoerd of Castile, also called Peter the Cruel, though his supporters called him Peter the Just. That's how brutal medieval Spain was. Some people thought his methods were fair. Mid-1300s, Peter didn't just kill his enemies, he studied them. When his half-brother Don Fadrique annoyed him, Peter invited him to the palace for reconciliation. Fadrique showed up, Peter had him stabbed to death at the dinner table, just mid-conversation. Then Peter went next door and killed Fadrique's brother too, just to be thorough. But here's where it gets creative. Peter kept a private torture room in his palace, and he'd personally designed punishments. One noble who betrayed him got locked in a cell where the ceiling slowly lowered day by day. Took weeks. Another got sewn into a leather sack with live cats and thrown in a river. Peter would watch these executions while eating, took notes. When civil war finally came, his own brother Henry killed him in a tent during negotiations. Henry stabbed him while Peter was lunging with a dagger, both brothers just going at it with knives until one stopped moving. That's how you end a king who made torture an art form. You out-brutalize him. Number 4. King Zvonimir of Croatia. Late 1080s. This story sounds like folklore, but it's recorded in multiple sources, and the fallout was definitely real. Zvonimir wanted to join a crusade, needed his nobles to approve sending Croatian troops to help the Pope, called a big assembly. The nobles said no. They were tired of foreign wars, didn't want to send their sons to die in the desert for Italian politics. Zvonimir lost it, stood up in front of everyone and delivered a curse. He called down divine punishment on Croatia, said the kingdom would never have a native king again, that foreign powers would rule them for centuries, that the land itself would suffer. Then he either died right there or got assassinated, depending on which chronicle you trust. Here's the disturbing part. The curse worked. After Zvonimir, Croatia spent over 800 years ruled by Hungarians, Austrians, Venetians, Ottomans, and basically everyone except Croatians. They didn't get independence until 1991. A medieval king rage quit so hard he hexed his own kingdom for almost a millennium. Sometimes words are more disturbing than torture. Number 3. Charles VI of France. Early 1400s. Started out normal enough, then one day in his 20s, while riding through a forest with his knights, a random peasant grabbed his horse's bridle and screamed that Charles was betrayed and surrounded by traitors. Just some crazy person. But it triggered something in Charles. He immediately drew his sword and started killing his own knights, murdered 4 of them before he was tackled and restrained. After that, Charles was never right again. He'd have episodes lasting months where he didn't recognize his wife, didn't know he was king, thought he was someone else entirely. The famous one, Charles became convinced he was made of glass, genuinely believed his body was glass and any physical contact would shatter him. He'd scream if anyone came near him, had iron rods sewn into his clothes to protect the glass, refused to let anyone touch him, including his own children. This went on for years. France was being run by a king who thought he was a fragile window. During his reign, England almost conquered France entirely because Charles would spend months at a time thinking he was a peasant named George, who definitely wasn't made of glass, but also definitely wasn't the king. His madness was so complete that when he had rare lucid moments, he'd beg his servants to tell him what he'd done while he was gone. They stopped telling him because it made him worse. Number 2. King Sigurd I of Norway, called Sigurd the Crusader. Early 1100s, Sigurd actually made it to Jerusalem, fought in the Crusades, came back a war hero. Should have been a triumph. Instead, the crusade broke something fundamental in him. He started having what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD and possible traumatic brain injury from repeated head wounds. But medieval Norway didn't have therapy. They had mead and violence. Sigurd would have episodes where he'd lose all impulse control, just pure rage. Once got into an argument with a random merchant in his own hall and beat the man to death with a candelabra. Just grabbed the nearest heavy object and kept swinging. His court learned to spot when an episode was coming, and they'd just evacuate whoever Sigurd was looking at, get them out of the room before the king decided they needed to die. Later in his reign, Sigurd would spend weeks completely catatonic, wouldn't speak or move, just stared at nothing. Then he'd snap out of it and wouldn't remember any of it. Toward the end, he started seeing demons, not metaphorical demons, literal ones. He'd fight invisible enemies, scream at things that weren't there, issue orders to execute people who didn't exist. When he finally died, his own son said it was a relief. A war hero turned into a walking nightmare because medieval medicine couldn't treat what war did to his brain. Number 1. King Henry VI of England, mid-1400s. This is the worst one because it combines all the elements. Inherited the throne as a baby, grandson of the legendary Henry V should have been great. Instead, Henry VI might be the most disturbing medieval king because of what his mental illness did to an entire country. He had what historians call catatonic schizophrenia. For months or even years at a time, Henry would completely shut down. Total absence of consciousness. He'd sit in one spot, wouldn't respond to anyone, wouldn't react to any stimuli. During one famous episode, his son was born, and they brought the baby to him, and Henry didn't move, didn't blink, showed zero recognition that a child existed. This went on for over a year. While the king was a living statue, England tore itself apart in the Wars of the Roses. Nobles fought for control while Henry sat in a chair and drooled. When he'd come back to lucidity, he'd have no memory of the time that passed, wouldn't understand why there was a war, why half his supporters were dead, why people were terrified of him. The worst part? Everyone knew this was happening. It wasn't a secret. They just kept pretending a man who spent years at a time as a breathing corpse was somehow still ruling England. Eventually, his enemies captured him, locked him in the Tower of London, and probably murdered him during one of his catatonic episodes. He might not have even known he was dying. A king who spent most of his reign not even conscious of his own existence, while thousands died in his name. Dead. So you just went through 10 kings who somehow made medieval times even darker than you thought. From a guy who treated murder like a subscription service with God, to a man who literally cursed his country into 800 years of occupation. To kings whose minds shattered so completely, they spent years thinking they were made of glass or just nothing at all. The through line is this: unlimited power plus mental illness, cruelty, or just really bad luck equals nightmare fuel for everyone involved. Medieval kingdoms didn't have the 25th Amendment. If your king went insane, you just had to ride it out and hope you weren't standing too close when he decided his knights were demons or his cook deserved to become the main course. History remembers the famous tyrants, but these lesser-known kings might be worse because their stories got buried despite being absolutely unhinged. If you want more medieval horror, check out the one about the execution methods that were so bad they got banned by the actual Inquisition.